Welcome back to Jacques in the Garden. Today I'm talking about tomato varieties and strategies. Over the years I've grown many types of tomatoes. They are my absolute favorite thing to grow and eat out of my garden. And I've kind of come together with this theory that I want to test this year on how to actually start my tomatoes, which varieties to start first, how to space them out through the season, and how to get that extended harvest throughout the entirety of the year. So that is what we are discussing today. We will be going over every single variety that I am growing, but also the reasons why I'm choosing them and when I'm going to be growing them. But first, since you guys are already here, let's check in on the seedlings I started 3 weeks ago in my first Seeds of 2025 video, just so you guys have a sense of how seedlings grow and actually germinate over the course of about 2 to 3 weeks. It's now been 3 weeks since I did that initial sowing of seeds, and here is where we're at. We actually have quite a few of the pepper varieties up. You could see the side view there. They look really nice and healthy. I'm very happy with it. And this is exactly where they've been the entire time, inside the greenhouse on a heat mat, because the greenhouse doesn't get heated. So at night, it's just as cold as the outside, and the heat mat really makes a big difference. Now, in terms of the other things that we started, those are also coming up, and they look really good as well. I even got my green onions up, and those have been giving me trouble for a while. And basically right here, that is a plant that is ready to be transplanted out. This is the size that I usually wait for before either potting up or transplanting. So that one's ready to go. This one's ready to go. Even the cilantro is ready because it's got a few of the true leaves. So looking good, but now let's get back to sowing some tomatoes. So pretty interesting to look at those seedlings because some of them are ready to go in the ground literally today, whereas others haven't even germinated. It is one of the classic games of starting seeds at home is that everything, even the same plant like tomatoes, can have variable germination and growth rate across every single variety. But now let's talk about tomatoes, the purpose of this video. I want to talk about the strategy that I'm putting into place. But before I do that, let's put our climates into context, because as you guys might know, I'm here in San Diego, California, zone 10B. What that means is that we don't really get a true freeze every single year. We do get light freezes, like literally maybe 30 or 32 degrees for a few nights out of the year, but that's it. But the thing that's more important is not the coldest period. That is important because it will kill your tomato plant. But the more important thing really is, when does your soil begin to warm up? So even though I don't get that cold here in San Diego, I also don't heat up very quickly either. So the earliest I would ever put tomatoes out is probably March. You could wait till April and they will also do just fine. So if I'm putting out my tomatoes in March, or let's just say beginning of March, I started my first seeds 2 months before that period in January. And those first tomato seeds that I started were the cold tolerant tomatoes, including Glacier. That is one that I mentioned the last time I have not had before. So we'll see how tasty that is and whether it's worth growing. And then I also have the classics New Girl and Early Girl. These are very reliable hybrids that do well in that early season, hence the name Early Girl. New Girl is kind of a play on Early Girl. So both of those are early season setters. These are Indeterminates. Glacier, I believe, is a Determinate. And then the last one that I also started was Moscovich. As the name implies, Moscow, Moscovich. This one is another cold climate tomato, and it's an Indeterminate as well. So those are the first ones that I've already begun. They're right now just about this big with 2 of their actual true leaves. And in about 4 weeks, they can come out into the garden. So 4 weeks from now, that puts us right into March, and that timing is perfect. Now, the rest of these tomatoes that we're starting today, I'm not going to start these because I already have them started. The goal for those is to get into the ground towards the end of March or even into early April. So from this point today, that is, we're our first week of February right now. So 3, 7, we're looking at least 7 to 11 weeks before I actually will put these guys out in the ground. And the beautiful thing is that by delaying my starting to now, I have plenty of wiggle room to put them out earlier if I choose, or I could keep potting them up and delay that transfer out into the garden. The main thing, again, I'm looking for is for that soil to warm up. You want it to be at least over 60 degrees, probably 65 ideally, but tomatoes will do just fine in something like 60. One more tip before we get into the varieties. When you are transplanting out those early season tomatoes, resist the urge to bury them deeply. As I mentioned, temperature of soil is really the most important thing for that early season growth. So even though, yes, tomatoes can set roots along their entire stem, early in the season when the soil is all cold and maybe even wet, I wouldn't want to go too deep because it's just not going to be a very active, warm soil that is inviting for tomato plants. So now we've got all that out of the way, we have our climates aligned. let's get into some varieties. So this year, it's kind of interesting because it's probably the least amount of determinate tomatoes that I've ever grown. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of this video because I might be growing some later in the season. But for now, the main goal here is to go over the tomatoes I'm trying to grow in that central portion of the season. We're talking true summer, middle of the season, where every large beefsteak tomato wants to live and thrive in. So the first couple bush tomatoes or determinates that I'm growing, first one is Supremo. This is a classic style bush tomato. It makes these Roma style tomatoes great for cooking into sauces, salsas. I grow this one pretty much every year. It's fairly reliable. The tomatoes are pretty dang good. Not like showstoppers, but they're very good for cooking and for eating fresh and things like salsa. So we'll start some of those. Then I have the red Pride bush. The reason why I like this one is that it has the more round style tomatoes. And what we really like to do with this size tomato, especially the round ones, is actually scoop them out, mix that stuffing with some sort of cheese, stuff it back in the tomatoes, bake it in the oven, and it is so incredibly delicious. So that is why I'm doing a determinate, because I want a bunch of them at once so we could have people over, entertain, and serve those tasty tomatoes. And then this one is kind of interesting. It is a large tomato. I actually grew one at the end of the season last year. It's called Beefy Purple and it has these really cool streaks on it. And it's actually a little bit of a chocolate tomato. It tasted really phenomenal, had a great texture. I had no idea it was even determinate when I was growing it, so that's actually a surprise to me because it makes a very nice sized fruit, which for determinate tomatoes, I'm usually not counting on. So for any sort of determinate tomato, I tend to start more of them because the plants don't get as big, they don't live as long. So it's more about a long haul of producing a lot of fruit all at once. So for each one of these, I'm actually going to start 1, 2, 3, an entire 6 cell of each. A couple updates too, I am sticking to the wooden tags with pencil on them. I find that it's holding up just fine for now. It's not gonna hold up for the entire season. I'm already accepting that. So I will have to remember to create new tags if I really want to keep track of some of these varieties. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that in terms of soil, this is basically the same soil that I used last time. I might have put a little bit of extra worm castings just because I know that tomatoes grow faster. They tend to use up the nutrients a lot quicker. So you can get away with basically adding a little extra fertility to that soil. Now, I am, in general, for every variety that I mention here, unless there's an exception, if there is, I'll tell you, I'm putting 2 seeds per each cell. And that is because I do not want to mess around here. It's just like the peppers. If this doesn't work, then my whole season gets delayed because now I'm waiting on my tomatoes to come up. And I don't want to have to rely on going to the store to fill in any gaps like that. I want to grow the tomatoes that I want to eat. So these are the ones going in. All right, now we're going to get into the real meat of the tomatoes here. These are the ones that I crave every single year. The determinants are great and all, but they're really just for convenience and cooking. These are the guys that I go for every single year. Now I'm gonna start off with 2 actual paste tomatoes here, plum or paste tomatoes. Both of them are from Johnny's, and one of them is Granadero. This is one that I've grown now. They're very tasty, multi-purpose plum tomato, have a very, very tiny pith and stem part, so they're very easy to process. The reason I got these originally is that I believe that they're resistant to powdery mildew. So powdery mildew is a major problem for anyone who's ever grown tomatoes. I'm sure you've experienced it. I am obviously experiencing it all the time here. As you can see with this overcast weather, that's powdery mildew's favorite. Now with these guys, since I am growing so many varieties, we'll see how many I end up with. I'm not actually sure. I'm only going to start 2 cells of each tomato. I don't want to have a absolute ridiculous carpet of tomato seedlings. I want to try to keep them healthy, so I'm not going to overdo it. I'm going to thin them down. If both of them come up, I'm going to remove one. I really only want 2 plants from each variety, and then afterwards I'll decide whether I keep both or end up getting rid of one and just planting the other. The second one here that I am putting in is called Tyran. It is a new one from Johnny's for me. It is an early San Marzano, so this is one that I could have put in that earlier sowing. I just didn't even realize that I had an early plum tomato when I ordered it. One of the things I have to say that I don't appreciate about the Johnny's packets is that they have basically 0 information relevant to the variety. They just have generalized information on tomatoes on the back. So I kind of forget what I have, but I did look it up, and that is an early San Marzano style. So I'm excited to try it because I don't mess around with San Marzano style tomatoes that often. One more thing to mention is that the Granadero, the Tyran, this one, and the next couple basically are all going to be hybrid tomatoes. I've been a little bit leaning into the hybrids. I love heirloom tomatoes. There's a lot of them that do really well, but this year with food prices going so nuts and everything kind of getting a little bit in the air, I want to make sure I have a consistent supply of delicious tomatoes from my garden. And so I'm not going to risk exploring new heirlooms that might not have the disease, package, and resistance that I need in my garden, which is really kind of the main reason to choose a hybrid, is that they tend to have way more disease resistance bred into them. And in my garden, I do occasionally suffer from root knot nematodes, occasionally from blight, and most often from powdery mildew, but that one's actually pretty hard to find resistance in for tomatoes. So the one that I'm putting in right now, I just realized I never mentioned, is called Strawberry Fields, again from Johnny's. This is a blight and nematode resistant variety, and it's a pink style tomato. In Bulgaria, where my parents are from, pink tomatoes are sort of king in Bulgarian culture when it comes to choosing the best tomato. So I am always looking for a new pink slicer, and this one is no exception, and we'll see how it does. Next up, this is a interesting looking tomato called Woodstock. It is a green bicolor tomato. So what that means is that it has like streaks of red and green, and you harvest it while it still has that green look to it, because it is one of those tomatoes that you can eat while slightly green and still be fully ripe, sweet, and delicious. Now, the reason why I chose this one in particular is that it had the description of being high in sugar and acid. If a tomato literally just says super sweet or sweet 100, anything like that, I've tried growing them and I just don't find them very interesting. I find that if it's only sweet, it gets very boring very quickly. There's not enough complexity in the flavor, not enough nuance. I get bored of them and just never eat them. So I'm always looking for complexity. Anything that has a balance of sweetness and acidity is really going to be the kind of tomato that I am leaning towards. Moving forward, it's called Big Beef Plus. So Big Beef is a classic beefsteak style tomato, and the plus is because it's an updated one that has a lot of disease resistance, in particular the nematodes. And last year this tomato crushed for me. It was very delicious, very versatile. It could be great on sandwiches, it could be good for cooking. My parents also enjoyed it, so that's always a plus because they are tomato fiends just like me. So this one I will probably continue to grow into the foreseeable future until I have something else that is better for that category. Here's another example of a new tomato from last year. To me, it's another hybrid. It's called Harvest Moon. It's an orange tomato. It tends to be very compact, extremely prolific. Some of the tomatoes were like this big and they were absolutely delicious. One of the things that's, I think, under described in a lot of varieties of tomatoes is sort of the creaminess and watery factor of the flesh. This is one of those tomatoes that I would actually consider creamy as being one of the descriptors, because the flesh is so dense that when you bite into it, it really kind of feels like soft and melty in your mouth. Really quite a stunning tomato. And again, this one I believe also has disease resistance, but it's really wonderful for Florida weave because it doesn't get that crazy tall and leggy. Another one of the hybrids that I added last year for nematode resistance that I am absolutely keeping is Lemon Boy Plus. Now, Lemon Boy is a tomato that's been around for a long time now. Lemon Boy Plus, again, anytime it's called plus, it's because it has some sort of new disease resistance or something else like that. And that is exactly the case here. This has a lot of different disease resistances and also nematode resistance. This is a yellow tomato, and it was also extremely delicious. Just like the Harvest Moon, I actually had never grown yellow or sort of orange tomatoes before. Harvest Moon is orange, Lemon Boy is yellow, and they were both phenomenal. Now, one of the main advantages to growing a tomato that doesn't have a traditional red color is it tends to be a little bit less attractive to certain pests like birds. Birds usually go after the red things because they are generally fruit. So if you have a green style tomato like the Woodstock or an orange and yellow, you might get away with less bird damage in general. So that could be one reason to consider growing those style of different color tomatoes. The color doesn't really associate anything with taste directly. You could have a super sweet orange tomato, a super tart orange tomato, and everything in between. So color, it's kind of just for fun to change up your palate, maybe get a different nutrient. And also it can be great for pest prevention on things like birds. And now these next three seeds, I'm almost a little bit shameful of even telling you guys about, because I don't know what happened when I bought these. I don't know how I convinced myself to spend the money on these seeds, but they're from Bene Seeds, and I'll talk more about them at the end because I have a specific variety that I got from them that we'll talk about later. But the first one here is called Benevento, and it's actually a hybrid I believe it's like a tomato that they bred just for themselves. And the reason why I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you guys about this is that these seeds are basically $1 per seed, which is pretty dang crazy. It's very expensive when it comes to tomato seeds. But they claim to have a lot of different characteristics. Almost all of their seeds, as far as I could tell when it comes to tomatoes, have been bred for long storage capability, which means that they could hang on the plant for a long time without getting overripe, or you could harvest them, bring them inside, and they could hold in the kitchen for a long time. And that is actually something I value quite heavily. So if this is something that really does work well for me, they do hold in the field for a long time and they're delicious, then that is a great way to also make the best use of your harvest, because you're not going to be as pressured to eat that tomato. Let's say the big beef has a bunch of red ripe tomatoes. I would eat those first, wait for this one, since I know that it could actually hold in the field for a longer time. So at $1 a seed though, it is a hard pill to swallow. And in this case, I'm just going to put one seed in each hole, because I'm not going to be throwing the seed around willy-nilly, that's for sure. Another one from them that is also quite pricey is Amalfi Pink. I am hunting pink tomatoes. That is one of the goals this year, is to find a delicious pink slicer big style tomato. And this is another one of those. Oh my God. All right, well. Wow, that is really bad. So I'm gonna have to reach out to their customer service. This is an empty packet of seeds, and this was over $20. So I don't even know why I'm laughing. I'm a little bit upset. I didn't ever think to check the packet. So fair warning, I'll message them and see if they believe me basically, but that's really unfortunate. I don't know how that's possible. This one I could feel does have seed. I was very excited for the Amalfi Pink, but oh well. This one's called Talvez. This is a small kind of golf ball sized tomato. It produces earlier in the season. I think they said 70 days from starting. So that's pretty dang good. And we'll see. Hopefully this one is delicious. This one was cheaper than the rest. I think it was like maybe 30 cents a seed instead of $1. So I'll put 2 to 3 in each cell for this one. It'd be a little bit wild. And just to convince you guys that I am not actually crazy, do you think it can be worth paying up to $1 per a tomato seed? And here's my argument, take it or leave it. I'm just trying to justify it for myself, I guess. But if this tomato is my favorite, if this tomato produces very heavily, if it does really well in my climate, if it could hold on the plant for a longer period of time than any other tomato, then I'm fine paying $1 for a seed. Because if I went to a nursery to buy just one tomato plant, which everybody does, you're often paying $3 to $6 for just a single seedling. So why would I feel bad about paying $1 for a seed? If it's a small company, they don't produce that much, it's more specialty, I am willing to try it, but it still hurts to place that order, especially when one of these packets ended up being empty. I think that covered all of our hybrid tomatoes. Now let's get into the classic heirlooms. The first one that we're going to be talking about is Italian heirloom, which has quickly become one of my favorite tomatoes. I don't know what it is about this tomato. It's honestly very basic on the surface. It's just a normal looking red tomato, but it has a really nice texture. It performs very well in my climate, and the taste is really delicious. This is another one of those that I remember my parents specifically asking for. The other one was Harvest Moon. So I know that this one will be well received. I know I like it, so I know I'm going to be growing this one every single year. And since it's an heirloom, I could even save my own seed and not have to buy fancy seed every single year. This next heirloom, I think I have tried growing it before, but I don't honestly remember if I ever ate it, and that is Nepal. I don't honestly remember much about it. I think Craig LaHoulier, one of the tomato godfathers out there, who actually brought us Cherokee Purple, he didn't bring us, but somebody sent him the seed and he put it out in the world for everyone else to consume and use. I believe he named this as one of the tomatoes that he really enjoys eating, which is, I believe, the reason why it caught my eye to begin with. So we'll try it this year. We'll see how it does. Maybe it just did really poorly for me and I forgot, and now this is a waste of time. So we'll see. That's why you should keep notes, and that's why I should honestly start keeping notes. All right, guys, I lied to you because I have another hybrid in my hand here, and it is Cherokee Carbon. This is a tomato I recommend literally everyone try to grow, because if you have tried growing Cherokee Purple before and you struggled, it didn't do that well, this one might be able to save you. It's crossed with Carbon, which is another dark tomato, has more disease resistance, it tends to be more vigorous and produce more fruit, and it's still absolutely delicious. So I think everyone should grow this one. I think it's worthwhile. And we'll talk a little bit more about it with the next tomato, because that is the original Cherokee Purple. All right guys, here we go. Cherokee Purple, probably the heirloom tomato that put heirloom tomatoes really on the map in the public conscious. It is a classic. It is one of the earliest heirloom seeds that was saved and propagated out for people in a meaningful way. And it is phenomenal to eat. It is so creamy. It is rich in umami. It is a beautiful tomato. I love that dark color. It's just so, so good. Whenever somebody asks me my favorite tomato, I tend to say Cherokee Purple. It is a slightly boring answer, but it's the truth. It is so delicious. I love it. In this case, I will actually be putting, let's say 4 seeds per cell, and I will be splitting these out to grow because I want more than just 2 plants. This is one that I just want multiples of because I just love eating it that much. And if I don't, I'll actually get in trouble because everyone's going to be asking me where the Cherokee Purples are, and I won't be able to tell them anything. So that one's going in. Next up, we've got a new one to me. I think it's been around for quite a while. Actually, it has because it's an heirloom, and that is Moneymaker. It is called Moneymaker because it produces so heavily that it's basically a money tree. At least that's what the story is for this tomato. One of the fun things about heirlooms is that they each have a unique story to them. And some of them can be quite interesting. Some of them are pretty boring. But in this case, it's a funny little homage to its namesake. So we're gonna go in with a few of these. I haven't tried this one before, so this is one where any one of these that I haven't tried before, I'm realistically only going to plant one of those plants because I don't know if I want to commit real estate to something that I might not even enjoy eating. So Moneymaker, we'll see how that one does. You might have noticed that at this point we have been talking about basically standard slicing tomatoes. We are going to get some cherries, but first I have a couple specialty tomatoes that you probably can't actually find anywhere. Sorry, I wish I could tell you where to find them because some of them were sent to me by viewers at home and some of them were brought from Bulgaria here for me to grow. The first one is actually somebody sent it in the mail to me. It's called Boris because his neighbor was called Boris and he gave him a delicious Bulgarian tomato variety and he was kind enough to share those seeds with me. So now I could continue Boris's legacy in my garden here. So we'll get this one going. There are a decent amount of seeds in there, probably about, I'd say like 12 to 20. And we're gonna go ahead, again, since I have no idea how this will do here, I'm gonna put 3 because I don't know how these were saved, what the germination rate is like. I wanna guarantee that I get at least 1. So that's the first one. The next one is called Vex, I think. My parents brought me a bunch of random tomatoes. This one apparently comes from Poland. So if that name is at all familiar, let me know. That's the only information I really have. And we'll see what it looks like. I have no idea what color this is, what size it is, anything about it at all. And it looks like this was actually home save seed. So don't ask me how I got here. I will not speak to that. I am going to say that this was brought here legitimately. So let's go ahead and put some of these guys in right over here. Next, we have another variety that my parents brought me from Bulgaria. This one's called Pink Magic. As I mentioned earlier, pink tomatoes hold a special place in Bulgarians' hearts. I don't know why, I don't remember why, but I remember eating absolutely gigantic, delicious pink tomatoes every time I'm in Bulgaria. So this was saved the old school classic way where you put the seeds on a piece of paper towel and let them dry directly. These were not fermented in any way, so this isn't going to be the most long-lasting seed. But the cool thing about this is that you could take a little section like that has the seeds with the paper still attached. That's fine, it's just paper. It'll break down in the soil, no problem. So I'm gonna just put that little chunk of paper directly in my seed cell there. And that's going to be what germinates. Then I'll tear off another chunk. And I'll put that in the second cell right over here. Another Bulgarian, this one's just called Huge Red. So I think it's gonna be a big red tomato. And again, we'll see what it's like. I'll give you guys updates if you're curious. Just remind to ask me later in the season. And I will be happy to share some updates. Maybe I could even save seed and send it around if you guys are interested in growing some Bulgarian tomatoes at home. So we'll get this one in the ground as well. And the final Bulgarian tomato for this year is going to be Magia Rose. This is one that I think I have grown before. It sounds very familiar, and I remember liking it. The only thing I can't say for sure is whether it performed that well, but that was a year where I had really bad root knot nematodes in my garden without realizing. And if you guys have watched my previous video, I've done a lot to try to treat that problem, including growing a cover crop specifically designed to eradicate them. So we'll see if it could do better this year. But now let's get into the cherry tomatoes. The first cherry tomato is one that I'm pretty sure I've grown before, but I've never had it as a mix, and that is the Bumblebee series of tomatoes. These were bred to, again, I believe to hold longer in the field and also to taste really incredible. And that's obviously what I'm interested in. All the seeds have different color. So if you want to get particular about which one's which, you could definitely pick them out that way. I'm just going to go ahead and put them in the soil and figure it out later. I'm not trying to get a specific color with these. I just want to try them out and see if I like them. And yeah, we'll just see. It's a new one and they're supposed to be very good. Again, I remember having some that I did like, so I'm not sure if it was this one. Hopefully it was, because they're also very attractive tomatoes. This next cherry tomato is one that I believe I grew for the first time last year and I absolutely fell in love. It's called Gardener's Delight. Now the reason why I like this tomato is twofold. First, it's not just a sweet tomato, it has some complexity to it. But second, I love the size of this tomato. It is probably like twice the size of a standard cherry tomato, which makes it really fun to eat in salads. It's really fun to roast, do tomato confit with. They're very juicy and flavorful. So I find them to be very versatile even as a cherry tomato, which usually could be a little bit more limiting. So this one probably will be growing every year in my garden, again, until I find something equivalent that can replace it, which I don't know if that'll ever happen. Just like the Sun Gold tomato, unless this Sun Gold, which is, by the way, my favorite cherry tomato, if this fails, like they can't produce it anymore, or I find one that is more stable and still this delicious, then I will replace it. But until then, Sun Gold's been growing in my garden since I started. So this and Cherokee Purple I've been growing since the very beginning. They're my standard go-tos that I recommend anyone. Somebody says, what's a slicer to recommend? Cherokee Purple. What's a cherry tomato recommend? Sun Gold. And that's really all there is to it. With these two tomatoes, I feel like I could get most of my tomato needs. I wouldn't be happy because it's not that versatile of a collection, but I would be satisfied with my tomato-ness because I'd have a delicious cherry that could be used in cooking or salads, and a delicious, delicious Cherokee Purple that I could eat every single day. This next one is another new variety to me. It's called Deutsch Fleiss, I think. I don't know German, so I don't know if that's right. But this is one that apparently somebody who had collected over 1,000 varieties of tomatoes on their own. This is one of the ones that they collected and it was one of their favorites and they shared it with Adaptive Seed Company. So we'll see. It's a smaller tomato. I wouldn't quite call it a cherry. A little bit bigger, probably bigger than a Gardener's Delight, but apparently very delicious. And anytime somebody describes a tomato as being particularly delicious or special, you know I'm going to be growing it because that is always what I'm looking for, are those unique, delicious varieties. So going in with those and we'll see how they do. All right, we got one more cherry before we get into the oddball and late season tomatoes. And that is from a small seed company that I discovered when I visited Maine called Boomy Farms, I believe, Boomy Devi Seeds. And this is Gardenet cherry tomato. It was one of the ones that they said was their favorite. They say it does extremely well where they are, which is coastal Maine. And oddly enough, I think coastal Maine and San Diego in the summer have very similar climates. So I think that since this did very well for them, I'm hoping it'll also do very well for me. So we're gonna go in with these guys and we'll see. Maybe this will be a contender for a nice small red cherry. I haven't found a small red cherry that I'm like absolutely in love with yet. So maybe this will be the one. So right here on this table, there's 27 different tomato varieties. I honestly thought I had pared it down, but now that I'm looking at this, I feel absolutely ridiculous and I'm not looking forward to figuring out where I'm gonna fit all these tomatoes, but that was the strategy. They are now planted and this is what we are living with. Now we do have this collection right here, which I haven't spoken about yet. So let me bring these guys out. The other part of my strategy here is that every one of these tomatoes that you see that I started right now, I am going to start again in May. At the beginning of May, I'm going to literally restart every single one of these. The ones that I end up really enjoying, they're going to go out and expand, basically. The ones that I don't like, I'm gonna remove the plant and then I won't have to worry about that one anymore. But I'm also doing that to hedge my bets on disease. In the early season, anything could happen. Spring is a total wild card. It could be extremely overcast, it could be really wet, or maybe it'll be really hot and dry and the tomatoes will do extremely well from the very beginning. You have no idea, you never know what to expect. And in my opinion, your best insurance against that is to start less. So in this case, I'm only trying to start 2 of each and to start more of them later after a month or 2. So I think either late April, early April into May is going to be when I do my next major sowing of these tomatoes. And then once I get into June, I will actually be starting my late season tomatoes, maybe even June into July. And that's gonna be what I'm holding in my hand here. They're actually a type of tomato that is famous in Italy for being able to store really well. Pinello is, I believe, how you say it. And that's the main reason I actually found Bene seeds in the first place, is because they breed and create a lot of these different storage tomatoes. This one is called Pinello Red. It's like a plum tomato that's very sort of narrow and more pointed. They could store for, I think, like 6 months off the plant. You collect them with their whole fruit truss, hang them on a piece of string somewhere nice and cool, and they will just sit there, not spoiling or rotting, and you could eat them as fresh tomatoes, even in the depths of winter. So I'm very excited to try this out. Another one that I've tried in the past is Principe de Borghese. I don't have that one this year because it's never done that well for me. Another one from Bumi Devi Seeds here is called the Pinello Gallio del Vesuvio. So Vesuvio, Mount Vesuvius, that's where a lot of tomatoes like San Marzano and the Pinello style storage tomatoes come from. So that makes sense that the name would match. And then the other one is going to be, again, that Granadero tomato that I talked about earlier. That's a paste tomato. Since it has more disease resistance, it'll produce well into late fall, early winter. And I've actually cut those trusses, kept them in either in my kitchen or this year in my shed. And I've been eating those tomatoes now 2 months after harvest, and they are still good. So that's one that I know, while not specifically a storage tomato, can be stored as a storage tomato. But that is it for the tomato lineup of this year. If there's a tomato that you guys think I missed, something that I'm sleeping on, or maybe one of these that I put in the ground for the first time that you think is terrible, please let me know. I'm so curious to hear. And I'd also love to hear your guys' tomato strategies. I think doing multiple sowings and having specific ones that you start early, middle, and late is going to work out really well for me, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and what works for you at your place. So thanks for watching. Good luck in the garden. I'll see you guys next time, maybe with some fresh tomatoes.